We will now be moving into our first panel discussion for today. And this one here is a topic that really touches upon the presentation that Ann-Kathleen has just mentioned right now, which is about finding really that balance between innovation and between regulation, for ensuring that the systems that we develop not only can help us create all the advantages that they promise, such as productivity gains and efficiencies, but really ensuring that they are fully aligned with our values. The next session is called the regulatory tightrope. What implications will regulations have on innovation and growth? And for this session here, I'm incredibly pleased to be having on stage here our moderator, who's called Philip Dawson, who's head of AI policy at Armilla Insurance, and who will be joining us here alongside with the other panelists on the stage. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to our speakers.
Good morning. I'm not sure if this, good morning, there we are. How is everyone today? So the next panel that we have, as we heard from our MC, is a topic I think that is very familiar to people who have been around technology and certainly AI for a number of years. But we're going to try and have a fresh take on it today with the group of panelists we have today who come from government, regulators, industry, and even product testing and inspection. So I will ask the panelists to each introduce themselves and their organizations. As they begin to speak, we have 30 minutes. We'll save 5 minutes for question and answer at the end. So please, I'm sure you came with questions, and we'll just dive right into it. So the first question I'd like to ask to the panel, starting with Martin, is for you, and based on your experience, as you're looking at the evolution of AI regulation, and nationally or in the EU particularly, what are the how do you experience regulation, the implications of regulation for innovation, or what is your view on the specific challenges we have today for AI regulation and its impact on innovation and small companies in the EU?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me here. So I'm Martin, I'm working for SGS. So SGS, maybe a few words on the company, is the world's leading testing, inspection, and certification company. So we, with our 98,000 people in 2,600 labs, we are there to independently, impartially, with our competence, create trust between parties. So we are a little bit like, you could see us like a neutral point in the ecosystems. Like a public notary, so to say, that assess companies, products, and solutions against ideally standardized criteria. And that's obviously where there's a strong link to regulation. So usually when you make a regulation, there are certain requirements, but they are typically maybe a little bit high level, and then you have derived some standards that set more clear criteria. And companies need to comply to those criteria, and we are the ones assessing those. That can be, for example, through an audit. I think every one of you may know audits. Audits is when you look at processes, management systems, and so on. For example, we just recently, in the context of AI, finished the first certification of an AI management system, so ISO 42001, a brand new standard. But we also do testing, so really hands-on stuff, heavy stuff, where we really test products for safety, cars, we test consumer products. And also when looking more towards technology and technological regulations, for example, cybersecurity. So cybersecurity on chips, for example. And what we see is when we create the link now to the question on regulation and innovation, obviously we are very deep into the regulation topic. And the tension we see, especially over the years, is that companies are confronted with more and more regulations, so it's really hard to navigate through this complex forest of regulations. On the one hand, on the other hand, the speed of new solutions coming to the market is getting faster and faster, so there needs to be a certain agility coming in. to not be so stiff in regulations and standardization. If you look at a standard, it takes years to develop a standard. So it really requires more agility to bring the new innovation cycles in line with also developing regulations. But what is important is that while I understand that in innovation everyone is concerned that there are too many boundaries, we should not forget there are always boundaries. So when you do innovation, you're always set with boundaries. For example, when I was in the semiconductor industry working as a security architect, there was constraints on power consumption, on speed, on size of the chip, on cybersecurity. There was always constraints to handle with. And that's why it's important also here to consider trustworthiness by design. So really, from the beginning, consider certain principles which are potentially coming from regulations at an earlier stage, but as I said, in an agile way.
Thanks very much, Martin. Ub, I'd love to hear from you now. You're at a regulator, so I have some ideas of what you might say. But how does innovation come into this in the thinking of the Dutch authority?
Thank you very much. My name is Huub Jansen. I'm working at the RDI, the Regulatory Authority on Digital Infrastructure, so it was my Inspector General just before here. And I'm also the chair of the Dutch and European Working Group, and what we try is to in a way, orchestrate or try to harmonize all regulation, all supervision on AI within the EU. Supervision of AI, so it's not just the AI Act. The AI Act is just one tool. It's the one mainly talked about at the moment, but it's already there. So we're already supervising. So it's not something new. If there's an AI in a medical device, it's part of the medical device regulation, so competent authorities are already supervising AI. When it comes to the AI Act, I do think it will go very well hand in hand with innovation. Because people need to make investment decision. You want security, you want to know, we all want AI for good and not for bad. What's good and what's bad, so regulation will help in what's good and what's not good. What is acceptable and not acceptable, and getting a level playing field, getting security on the requirements. But also the AI Act will work on an ecosystem of trust for AI, and I do think that will help and benefit anybody. You're just part of that ecosystem. And it's a risk-based approach. So if there are small risks, it's not such an issue. So I do think a lot of, especially startups and innovation, you can do a lot without really being tempered by the AI Act. As soon as it becomes big and there are big issues, then you need to comply with a lot of regulation and it will become more of a burden. But you should want to, as a company, you don't want to get a liability suit or whatever. So I do think it benefits all.
Thanks very much. We're going to shift gears and go to our second question for Mary, Stefan. We'll start with you. We heard from the Inspector General of the Dutch Authority just now some of the measures that are being taken to ensure that regulatory measures will be more easily adopted and particularly for small companies. I'd love to hear from both of you. Which of these you think are the most compelling? Which of these measures, whether it's industry standards or regulatory sandboxes or a timeline for implementation, which of these are critical, which are most critical to startups and small companies as they plan for conformity or compliance with national or EU regulation? Mary.
Yeah, so Mary Haatien and representing SciDot here. We are a company focused on helping companies and governments also in systematic AI governance, also future compliance. My perspective to this question is building on our work that we've been doing for the past 2 years with more than 100 European AI product companies as part of EU-funded research programs to actually get started on complying with the expected requirements from AI Act. And it's been a wonderful learning process. Based on that, I would say that education is critical for us to be able to actually deploy and enforce the policies in a way that doesn't actually harm the innovation. So there is huge gap in understanding and knowledge related to how to comply, not only what are the requirements, but how to comply with the coming regulations. On sandboxes, I would also briefly like to comment, because there is a lot of expectations on regulative sandboxes. It's part of the package framed as means for innovations, means to support European innovation. So that I'm a little bit more skeptical of that as a means. And what I mean is that I'm 100% sure it will be helping a lot regulators understanding the impacts and getting that feedback from the industry. But thinking of regulative sandboxes as a means for SMEs to help them comply and support their innovation, I'm not so sure. So I think a little bit too much maybe has been put emphasis or expectations for regulative sandboxes, while we should actually find much more efficient, faster ways for SMEs to get up to pace on how to comply with the coming regulations.
Thanks very much. Stefan.
Thank you. I lead the team for special projects in the Office of the Prime Minister of Serbia. One of the key priorities there is to develop and implement our AI strategy that we adopted in 2019. And from the start, we really wanted to have an approach that is focused on creating more innovations and research in Serbia. And we have so far adopted ethical guidelines, and it was a very comprehensive and long process where we got a lot of feedback from companies, which was very useful for us when we are now developing our own regulation. Of course, because we are candidate member for EU, we have to comply with EU AI Act when it comes into power. But what I think in general is that it's important to have very transparent and clear industry standards, because it seems to me that many regulators don't really understand what is actually happening in the process of development of AI product, and then you end up with having people in the government who don't really know how to regulate AI. And I think building capacities for regulatory framework is very important in the sense to have public servants who can really understand what they're regulating, but also companies who can clearly understand what is happening and which kind of conditions they have to comply. Because if it's too confusing, which somewhat it seems to be right now, I think it really stops innovations. And also regarding regulatory sandboxes, I think they're a great idea, but it's also very limited. I think if Europe wants to be ahead of a pack, in a sense ahead of Asia and US and Canada in development of AI, we really need to focus on high growth companies. So sandboxes can help in a really early stage, but I think in general to have high growth and development of innovations, you really need to have clear and implementable rules. And these require to have people who can really implement them properly. So I think it will take us, I know I talked to many different countries, it will take all of us a lot of time to really educate people in the government sector how to properly implement all these regulations. So I think it might be too soon right now to go too hard on regulation and just to leave some more open space for innovations.
Thanks, Stefan. So we touched on industry standards, international standards, regional standards. I know we have a very informed audience here, but this is potentially a very key piece of compliance or conformity in the EU and potentially outside the EU's borders as well. Self-assessment against harmonized standards is one of the pathways to conformity, but there's some confusion, right, about which of these international standards might be applicable, which might be published as harmonized standards, how many there might be. So I'd love to just hear from the panelists now on this topic. If you're a small company, if you're if you're a large company that is new to adopting AI, comment on some of the challenges or strategies for navigating the very complex and landscape of international standards and how they might be relevant to you as a business that is either developing or deploying artificial intelligence. Anybody, jump in. Not all at once.
Well, standards are never fixed, so they're always moving and evolving.
Yeah.
And I do think, well, crucial at this moment is just get started, just get moving. Developments go very quick, so companies just start as soon as possible. When it comes to standards, if you look at on a high level, in the AI Act already says which kind of issues are relevant. So you already know to some extent what you need to do. And of course, it will take 1 or 2 years before the standards are formalized, but discussions are starting. So it's not that difficult to just start and along the way maybe fine-tune when there are standards more specific. But you don't have to wait for it. The main things are already known. There are already a lot of standards. When it comes to cybersecurity, data handling, because of the NIS directive and the GDPR, there are already a lot of standards you can use. And if you use that in your common sense, also from a competent authority, if a company don't comply in a few years, but they have all the standards in place and they show that they tried to do their best, you're not going to fine them. Maybe you give them some time to adapt if they are not complying, but so that's not an issue. Don't be afraid, and especially don't wait.
Mira, I'd love to just turn to you. I think you and I first met in 2018 or 2019 at an IEEE event, I believe, at a conference a few years ago. So you've been involved in the standardization landscape for AI for quite some time. Can you comment on how this is how you've seen it evolve? Who is showing up to some of these meetings, and some of the ways that you see businesses, as Uben mentioned and already, are beginning to work with these standards and maybe are already some ways away along the pathway to conformity even?
Yeah, but maybe I think that there are more better persons to comment exactly on the standards and how they have been evolving in the panel other than me. But yeah, I think there is a competition on standards as well. It's an industry of its own. So I'm having thumbs up for new standards to be introduced soon, and they will definitely be very important. Also, that kind of standards that help companies to also comply across the regions and different policies. So that will be important vehicle to enable that. Companies who are operating in several regions with different regulations, so also to seek for compliance on several of those at the same time. Something that I'm missing from standards or supervisory guidance related to AI Act is, and this is related to SMEs and innovation as well. So there is, in a way, in AI Act, this sentiment of proportionality in the regulation. So in all the requirements, there is that this requirement must be complied in an appropriate level to the system that you're building and its intended use. I think there would be huge value of clarifying what does it actually mean. So if I have a startup and 10 customers, or getting started in my AI business, how is my compliance to the requirements different from the company who is deploying their AI product for hundreds of millions of users? I think that is a gap that I hope either standardization organizations or regulators with supervisory guidance can address in a short time.
I think that's a great insight. For those of you who have not had the chance to look at a copy of any standard that may be relevant to artificial intelligence, risk management, quality management, standards on bias, assessment of robustness of machine learning systems, sometimes they could read like another piece of legislation. You know, they are at a level of generality that requires effort to interpret and implement, and I think guidance and proportionality as well are really key things to consider. Martin, it looked like you were going to jump in there.
Yeah. First of all, I hope you heard me at the beginning, so I don't need to repeat the whole thing.
Martin, you have to start over.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Martin, I'm working for SGS. Okay. No, so for the standards, so we explored a lot that landscape, and we share these thoughts that it's an issue or a challenge for startups and alike. But what is really good is if you start roughly the regulation, you see these basic areas which you need to cover. You need to get familiar, you need to incorporate it into your DNA somehow. And then there are a lot of good overviews already created. By the way, we also created a white paper, which you find at our booth, which maps all these key criteria and areas to standards which are under development or released. We also refer to other white papers and reports. So there are already good reports and white papers out there that should help navigate through this landscape.
Thanks very much. So we have about 3 minutes. We're going to go into kind of our closing discussion. So this is the cue to start thinking about those questions that you'd like to ask to some members of the panel. This is the World Summit AI Amsterdam. We've had a EU focus, but it is still a World Summit. So let's zoom out a little bit, and just knowing that there are people attending today, including myself, who have traveled some distance and are in countries that are considering other approaches to regulating AI. Based on the discussions that you have been having nationally, regionally, what are some of the takeaways? Of course, we haven't had the full experience of what this means in practice yet. But based on the discussions and ideas that you've heard, what are some of the recommendations you might have to other governments or businesses about how to strike the balance between how to prepare for regulation to make sure that innovation is still possible and thriving, as we heard the gentleman from the Consumer Technology Association mentioned this morning and other speakers. What are some of the recommendations you have for whether it's policymakers, industry, that you would just like to leave the conference with today? Yes,
Yeah,
Stefan.
so as representing a country that is still not a member of EU, but trying to be, so I think we are in a very interesting position where we can still be more flexible in regulation. The feedback that I got, I was also a couple of weeks ago in Montreal on Global Partnership on AI workshop. Many countries are still struggling to build capacities to regulate AI. And I think EU is rushing into regulatory framework quite quickly. And I think it's a bit stereotypical that EU always wants to regulate. From our side, in Serbia, we are trying to take more of an approach that US and UK are having, to be more open for innovations and to be a bit more flexible with regulation in the beginning, because I think it will take a lot of time to adopt. When we were having our ethical guidelines, it took us more than a year to adopt them because we had also watchdogs, NGOs, but also companies that told us if you have very strict guidelines, we cannot comply with that right now, or it will take us much more money to do so and so on. So it will definitely take out from innovations. And I think it's very important to have the whole global image, because there are countries that are not focusing a lot on regulatory framework in AI, and they are developing AI quite quickly. So if we get ourselves too strict and too fast into regulatory framework without proper adoption from the company side and innovative side, I think we may end up in a back on the line of innovations in AI. So I think our approach is to be more flexible. We are still building our case and probably not going to adopt a law for next 1 or 2 years. So
Thanks so much. So we're going to go make this into a lightning round, a couple sentences each, and make sure we get to Q&A.
All right, my focus would be what I think other regions can learn from Europe is focusing on where the majority of the problems are. So at the moment, there is a lot of discussion about AI safety and the long-term risks and the regulation related to these challenges. It's very interesting that some regions have kind of taken a strategy to focus on those ones, and there is very little discussion about the actual everyday challenges that the whole ecosystem using these frontier models are facing, and other ML models as well. So yeah, practical. Let's be practical and focus on the problems and issues of the majority of the industry.
Thank you, Mary.
I think AI is a global business, so you shouldn't. Is it still working? Did I break it? No, okay. So it's a global market, so focus on the global market, even though there are a lot of differences in legislation, but that's not your problem. So we should try, as governments on a UN level, to try to organize it, just like we do as supervision. We're working now with UNESCO in order to organize our supervision. And there is still you see an effect now, the Brussels effect, so a lot of legislation in other member states or other countries in the world are copying to a large extent the European. So if you focus on the European legislation, you're good for the global world.
Thanks. Martin.
I can keep it short. I wanted to say exactly the same thing.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay, because typically a lot of companies are delivering solutions in every kind of region, and if they're confronted with complete different things and even conflicting things, it's a challenge. So best really to build on what's there already and take the good things over.
Okay, great. So I believe there's a microphone going around the room. Oh, there's somebody in the front right here. It was very quick. If you don't have a microphone, but if you're loud enough, I'll repeat your question, sir. Oh, here we go.
I would rather ask my question myself, thank you. I'm in Furtwängler, Böhringer, Ingelheim, so I have to applaud the lady on the panel because I share her concerns. And who do you want to fool, you know? It's no longer a global market. We are going to see the end of the World Wide Web. We already see on the horizon a fragmentation where the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians are not following our rules. Who do you want to fool? And really the G20 summit and all those nations, we represent roughly 1 billion. If you look at all the other, if you look at the Guangzhou circle, you put a needle in there, draw a circle with a radius of 2,500 kilometers, that's where half of the world's population already resides. When are you going to wake up? This is sleeping pills, you know, this is benzodiazepines that you are giving to the people, and you're not really very conscious of what the hell is going on. And this is where I'm with the lady on the panel. I'm a little bit more critical on that, and when do we really see that I'm quoting Amy Webb, the big 9. It's 9 platform companies on this planet who really determine the future of this planet. It's Meta, it's Facebook, it's Amazon, it's Google, it's Apple, it's IBM, it's Microsoft, it's Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent. She has been writing about that with a best-selling book in 2019. When are we all waking up? And when are we really have a more critical approach? Where's the metaverse? Why didn't the metaverse work? Why didn't Bitcoin? Why didn't distributed ledger? We have been talking, and we heard it from the CTO of Amazon for AI. 1956, the Dartmouth conference, there was the AI winter, and we are just about to peak out. When are you waking up, and when are you going to answer all those questions to the public? Thank you.
So, a question, maybe more of a call to action. Anybody on the panel want to respond? I'm afraid that's the only question we have time for. All right. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, and I'm sure some of the panelists will be happy to engage in this side after the conference. Thanks very much.